All right, well, here we go. I would say good morning. It's morning where I'm at in San Francisco, but I guess good afternoon to you all. It's really exciting to be part of this presentation. I think it's my first where we actually have local SE2050 signatories kind of discussing their commitments. So really excited to see how this chat develops. My name is Megan Stringer. I guess I'm the former co-chair of the SEI Sustainability Committee and have been involved in the development of SE2050 since its inception. So here to give you a little bit of an overview of the program, where it's going, and kind of what's been going on. So I think we'll just start with a very quick reminder as to what embodied carbon is and where structural engineers fit into that equation. And so embodied carbon is really just one piece of the carbon puzzle, but it is the environmental impacts associated with building construction and use. It has to do with the materials and products used to construct buildings. And so it's all that carbon dioxide emitted from extracting, manufacturing, transporting, and installing materials. And so traditionally, the embodied impacts associated with these building materials, it roughly only accounted for about 20% of a building's total impact, whereas operational impacts was that other kind of 80% of that pie. And so I think if you consider the fact that most buildings are becoming more energy efficient and using clean energy, and the fact that buildings typically don't see that 50 to 60-year lifespan, that they're either being refurbished or torn down during that time, the embodied carbon piece of that pie starts to have a lot more significant impact and start to be a much more significant portion of your building's overall carbon impact. And so it's not a small amount of carbon. Every year, 66 billion square feet of buildings are constructed. And so the embodied carbon emissions associated with that is approximately 3.8 billion metric tons of CO2 per year. And so in fact, we're building so much that we're actually building a new New York City every month for the next 30 years. And it's estimated between now and 2050, we're going to be adding 2 billion people to the planet and close to double the square footage of the built environment. And so that was a very brief overview, but we know that embodied carbon is a big portion of a building's overall impact. You might be wondering how much embodied carbon does the structure alone account for? And so this was a study done by Arup, but these donut charts are essentially illustrating the embodied impacts from various building types. And what you can see from each of them is that the structure, so both the superstructure and the substructure, which is shown in green and red, it accounts for over 50% of a building's embodied carbon. So as structural engineers, we have direct influence over what materials are used and in what quantity, and therefore we can really greatly impact the sustainability of our structures. And so the structural engineering community has been wanting to do something about embodied carbon, and that has been kind of occurring with an effort called SE2050. So this is the first and only national program dedicated to the structural engineering profession, whose sole purpose is to achieve net zero embodied carbon structures by 2050. And so a little history on this effort. With embodied carbon becoming increasingly on the design community's mind, it was really within the Carbon Leadership Forum, the group out of the University of Washington, actually, that wanted to really do something about this. And so they incubated this idea of getting to net zero embodied carbon by 2050. And then what came out of all of that was them issuing a challenge to the structural engineering profession back in 2019, that all structural engineers shall understand, reduce, and ultimately eliminate embodied carbon in their projects by 2050. And so around that same time that they were kind of developing that idea of the challenge, they approached the Structural Engineering Institute, so SEI's Sustainability Committee, with this idea of developing the US's, or I guess it's broader than US obviously, but the US's program for structural engineers. And it was back in December of 2019 that we got the Board of Governors for the SEI, they voted their unanimous support for the challenge. And then it's been within that SEI Sustainability Committee that we've been developing the SE2050 commitment. And so our program officially launched at Greenbuild back in 2020. And to date, we currently have, that should say 82, not 81, apologies, firms committed to the program. And this is growing, which is super exciting. We have had over 52 firms submit their embodied carbon action plans, and over 100 projects embodied carbon data have been submitted to our database. And so this database will be used to set real benchmarks for projects. And so, the industry will now finally, or hopefully soon, all have accurate benchmarks to use use as an industry. And then eventually that data will be used to start to set embodied carbon limits for projects. And so this effort has been paralleled off of the Architecture 2030 challenge and the AIA 2030 commitment. And this chart is just showing how we see SE 2050 stacking up with the AIA 2030. And it's really just showing one possible scenario of how to get to net zero by 2050. And so you may be wondering, how can you actually get to net zero? And so this was something the Sustainability Committee looked at and developed this white paper that really explored that exact question and how is that even possible? And so the paper outlines a couple different scenarios of how we can get there through a combination of design improvements, greening of the electrical grid, material production improvements, and carbon offsets. And so these tracks could combine in many different ways to get us to net zero. This chart is showing a few of them. And so there's really no clear path. Or there's no one path, I should say, but I guess what is clear is that it will take more than design improvements alone to get us there. And so looking at these possible scenarios that the paper explores in more depth, I think the fourth bar is really what we're hoping for. So we're hoping to see really big improvements in design, the grid and the production of the materials, combined with carbon sequestration of materials. So really no offsets essentially. And so then that fifth bar that you're seeing there with the bulk of the yellow of that bar is really the least desirable, where we're not doing much to change kind of status quo and really relying on that offset category. So anyway, take a look at that paper. It's a really interesting read in your free time. And so the vision of SE 2050, we really see this commitment program consisting of three main parts, and that's plan, implement, and share. And so by plan, we're going to have the structural engineering firms committing to establishing an embodied carbon action plan, where they're going to indicate how they're going to educate their firms about embodied carbon, how they're going to report embodied carbon on their projects, how they're going to document their embodied carbon reduction strategies, and how they'll advocate within the industry. And then by implement, we'll have the structural engineering firms engage in sustainable goals on projects, specifying low carbon impact materials, assess and understand the embodied carbon impact of their projects' design decisions using LCA methodology, and then finally share. So that's where we have the firm sharing embodied carbon data of their projects to a central database for understanding and developing of national trends and appropriate reduction targets. And so how does it all work? There's really only three parts of joining SE 2050. And so the first up is we ask that you complete or fill out a signed letter by your firm leadership saying that you're committing to the program and going to meet the requirements. And then within 6 months of submitting that letter, you need to develop your firm's embodied carbon action plan. And then lastly, you'll need to submit embodied carbon data from 2 to 5 projects per year. So depending on the number or the size of your firm will depend on the number of projects you need to submit. So now obviously those are just minimums. We would love to have more project data submitted to the database, and that is what we've been seeing with that over 120 project data that's already been submitted. And so the point of all this is that you would be updating annually your embodied carbon action plan, as well as having new projects annually submitted to that database. So we intentionally at SE 2050 kept the kind of barrier of entry really low for the program on purpose. We want to get as many firms committed as we can. We've created templates for everything to make it as easy as possible. And so be curious to hear from our three firms today how the whole process has been going. But essentially, yeah, so you can start that all off by downloading a copy of a commitment letter and getting your firm leadership to sign that. And then next up would be developing that embodied carbon action plan. And so again, we were really trying to make this as simple as possible for firms. One thing that's great right now is you can go on to the website and view all of the embodied carbon action plans that we have, over the 50 that we have so far. They're all very unique and fascinating in what people are putting in there. And I will say from my personal experience of having to develop one for my firm, I think it was a little daunting at first, just having to put something down and be held accountable, but just the process of having to go through that was really helpful. And so I would definitely recommend considering that, even if you're not a signatory of the program. The other thing that we did add on there is kind of illustrated on the right is there's also a Google form if you just wanted to fill that out for your ECAP. That's totally acceptable as well. So take a look and yeah, be curious if you all have any feedback. And then lastly is kind of this database, the last part. And so right now the beta version of the database is live. We're really trying to prioritize these three main things. So familiarizing structural firms with embodied carbon reporting, collecting right now just GWP. And so right now you're open to use whatever LCA tool you want to. We do ask that you list the tool, but we're really just looking for that GWP number right now. And so by doing that, we're hoping to increase the visibility of the need for embodied carbon benchmarks. And so hopefully we'll be able to start to set those as we get more data. For now, we're only collecting GWP. There has been a lot of discussion within the committee about collecting material quantities as well, but for now it's just that GWP, but I do expect that to evolve as our program evolves as well. And so a quick snapshot of what that database looks like. So as a signatory firm, you'll get a login, you'll be able to log in and start to look at the database. In here, you'll be able to see all of your project data that you've entered. I think right now we're just using one of the CLF benchmarking studies to kind of have some plots in there based on different building types. But it's, yeah, we're really excited about this. It just launched less than a year ago now. So anyway, more to come on that. And so, yeah, just really, are you ready to join that movement? And so let me leave you with a few resources and next steps, and I'd be happy to share these slides with you so don't feel like you have to write all this down. There's been a lot of really great resources coming out of the SEI Sustainability Committee, just showing kind of some of the major publications up on the right. I think the colored ones you have to pay for, unfortunately, but the white one is for free to download. And then really just highlighting some of the resources that we've been developing at SE2050. I think a couple things have come out recently. If you haven't checked the website, we have a really great guide out there that outlines all of the embodied carbon credits for the North American green rating systems. I think we've captured most of them. We are trying to add in a couple more, and we're working on a European guide as well. We do have some really great specification guidelines out there, which I realize that's the wrong link. There is some specification guidelines up on the SE2050 website that takes into account some of the CLF work that has been done previously. So check that out if you guys are looking to update your specs and general notes. And then the last two, I think we have a few minutes, so let me just dive into the embodied carbon intensity diagrams first. So these were an interesting project that has been undertaken where we're really just trying to increase the profession's embodied carbon literacy. So very similar to how in like schematic design, you can rattle off different like tonnage of steel for certain framing, for example, and material quantities for concrete and whatnot. We wanted to do kind of the same thing for embodied carbon metrics. And so what we've been doing is studying different typical bays of framing. We've had at least 3 different engineers design the framing with some basic criteria, and then we've run those material quantities that we have been developed from those 3 designs into different LCA softwares. And so from all that, what you're getting is a equivalent pounds per square foot of embodied carbon in these different floor systems. And so check out the website because there's a little bit more nuance to this, but essentially, that steel 30 by 45 bay has around 25 PSF of embodied carbon versus the concrete flat plate at 30 PSF. And then the mass timber or timber in general, we've reported kind of both numbers, whether you include the biogenic carbon or not, just given that there's not a lot of consensus in our industry on what to do with that. So that's kind of why you see those 2 numbers reported. And then there are 4 more bays that are pretty much finished and hopefully getting up on the website very soon. So hoping that these are useful to you all and you can start to use them in your, just increase your literacy in embodied carbon. So there is some work underway potentially to look at different lateral systems and how that impacts embodied carbon as well, but that's still kind of in the works. And then the last thing I wanted to show you is let me just pull this up. If we take a look at the the embodied carbon order of magnitude tool. So this is up on our website, and this is totally acceptable to use for your SE2050 commitment. But you can come in here and just put in your different quantities of material, and it's going to spit out your GWP. So trying to just put in some numbers here so I can show you. It is color coordinated. And if you put in your total square footage of your area, let's say it's like, is that 100,000? It's going to then show you where your impact's coming from. So you can see, yeah, where that impact is coming from. So you're totally acceptable right now to submit this embodied carbon data into the database for your SE2050 commitment. So anyway, I think this information is just based on industry average EPDs right now. And so anyway, there has been some talk about trying to up this tool a bit to make it a little bit more useful depending on like geography, where you're located in North America, et cetera. But for now, it's just using industry average. So take a look at if you click on this, it'll give you a bit more info if you're interested. I do think, you know, ecom is great for these kind of simple studies, but obviously as your firm gets more involved in kind of the LCA space, you'll start to be utilizing a tool that, you know, can do the full life cycle phases, looks at all the different LCA impact categories, et cetera. But for now, it's a great way to just get yourself started if you're new in this space. And so I will leave you with really just getting involved. I hope your main takeaway is that I think if we don't take this topic on as an industry, others are going to do it for us. So if there are architects on the call, I do think we need to be in a position where we're in control of our materials and our quantities, and we don't want to have architects dictating to us, you know, certain, you know, cement replacement in our concrete mixes, for example. So I urge you all to get involved and learn more about the program and what you can do to reduce embodied carbon. There's a lot of great presentations that have been given on embodied carbon reduction strategies and whatnot that are kind of posted on either the Sustainability Committee or SE2050 website. So take a look at those for some great resources. And I think with that, I will hand it over to Elaine at DIALOG to get us started talking about the signatory firms.
Thanks, Megan. And I think, Michael, if you let me share your screen, I can get started. Perfect, thank you. Hi, everyone. My name is Elaine, and I'm a structural engineer with DIALOG. Give me a second, I think I need control, Michael.
Sorry about that. Can you try now?
I don't think it's working. Yeah, it's good now. Thanks for your patience, guys. At DIALOG, we are passionate about design. We believe it can and should meaningfully improve the well-being of our communities and the environment we all share. This statement is everywhere at DIALOG. It's on our website, it's on every presentation deck, it's on all our project proposals because it truly defines the core of who we are. Reading that statement, it should come to no surprise that in 2017, DIALOG signed on to the AIA 2030. The AIA 2030 is a strive for new buildings, developments, and renovations to be carbon neutral by the year 2030. This, in general, was a big milestone for the industry as a whole because it showed that design experts were taking on more responsibility and leadership in offsetting the greenhouse gas emissions caused by the very buildings we create. So we know that the AIA 2030 focuses on operational carbon, but what about embodied carbon? As Megan mentioned, you know, as buildings become more and more efficient, embodied carbon can start to play a huge role. In fact, with structural members often representing over 50% of the embodied carbon of the building, it's quite obvious that structural engineers need to have a seat at the table. And not just have a seat, but we need to take on a more active role. So in August 2021, DIALOG signed on to the SE2050. In January of this year, we published our Embodied Carbon Action Plan, which is now live on the SE2050 website. This document is very much our roadmap and outlines the why, the how, and the who. As a fully integrated design practice, DIALOG has the unique opportunity to address and reduce both the operational and embodied greenhouse gas emissions of our built environment. Our anticipated milestones and targets are as shown. We expect that adoption and change will not be linear. As our teams gain experience and efficiency with conducting LCAs, and as project requirements and industry best practices become more standardized, we expect to see an exponential increase in meeting our goals. These targets will be reviewed and updated as required to confirm goals are realistic but still challenging. And where local jurisdictions adopt a faster timeline for reductions, those requirements will be met. Now, the question of the day, or rather for the next 20 some years, is how are we going to get to net zero? Well, we have to start early. The start of the project is where we can make the biggest impact. We plan to educate our design teams to follow the hierarchy of carbon reduction potential as outlined in the Institute of Structural Engineers Design for Zero document. This hierarchy begins with, firstly, build nothing, meaning can we use the existing building completely? Build less. Can we minimize new construction and use the existing structure wherever possible? Build clever. Can the new structure use the minimum design loads and serviceability requirements? Can we optimize our structural arrangements? And lastly, build efficiently. Can construction waste and emissions be reduced? Guided by this hierarchy, we will start conducting LCAs on all our projects, first at the 90% schematic design phase, then once again at the 100% CD phase, so for construction documents. Each of our 5 studios has identified a representative to champion this practice-wide effort. Their role will include answering questions related to embodied carbon or conducting LCAs, to developing and presenting education sessions at DIALOG. In addition, they will advocate for studio needs and maintain awareness of global trends and relationships with industry leaders. Now, it's important to say that these champions are not the only ones who will be doing the LCAs. In fact, if we only assign one person to do the LCAs on our teams, then that is the wrong way to go. Our goal is to foster a culture within DIALOG and really the industry where embodied carbon is as important in our structural designs as service and safety and serviceability. In order for us to get there, we need everyone on board. This brings us to what have we learned so far? Our first lesson, and perhaps a hint to what we have to overcome, has to do with modeling. I'll give an example with a short story. So I conducted an LCA for one of our outdoor parking garages for the structure and foundation. We were past the CD phase, so our Revit model was fairly complete. During the Revit quantity export and entering the data into one click, or rather after doing that, I found that the embodied carbon results were a bit low. I won't go too into the details, but it was just a bit low. I'm not sure how I came to the conclusion, but I realized that the perimeter spandrel beams in certain walls were not included in the quantity export. In fact, it turns out they weren't modeled in the structural model, and in fact, they were just borrowed from the architectural model. Not to put the blame on anyone, but how this happened was because the architect kept changing the layout. It was easier for us to keep up by using their element instead of changing our own to match theirs every time. This shows just how easy something can slip through the cracks. This also highlighted the importance of having a complete and accurate Revit model. If this means we need to spend a bit more time when we model in order to assign the proper element and family to each member, then this is what we have to do. We have a great tool at our disposal and we need to find the best way to leverage it. This also reminded us that we need to involve the technologists and communicate what kind of information we require so they can best help us. Another lesson learned was that it is beneficial for the same engineer to do the LCA. Again, this supports the idea that one single person shouldn't be responsible for the entire team or company's LCA. As much as we want to automate the process of just exporting the quantity takeoff from Revit, we also shouldn't blindly plug and chug numbers either. An engineer who has worked on the project will have a much better understanding of the project and be quicker in every aspect because it's not their first time looking at the model and sorting through the structure. Also, they may be able to sense that something is off quicker. We have to remember that the idea is not to do more LCAs. Our goal is to change the industry and get to net zero. How we do that is going to depend on building up our knowledge and with structural systems and the role that embodied carbon plays in them. This cannot be done by a select few. We need everyone on board. And with that, that is the end for me. And I believe Emily from Intuitive will be up next. Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, Elaine. All right, hopefully this will work. We know, oh, it doesn't seem to be. There we go. Okay, cool. Oops. All right. Hi, everybody. I'm Emily. I lead our Sustainable Performance Stewardship Group at Intuitive, and I also lead our Whole Life Carbon Consulting Service. So Intuitive is a group of consulting engineers, designers, and project managers, and we really are focused on designing for a sustainable future. We're kind of newer signatories to SE2050, but we've been on our journey of low embodied carbon in our designs for a few years now. So I'm going to just quickly go through kind of based on the breakdown of the 4 pillars around the SE2050 commitment, kind of what we're trying to do to meet the requirements of these different pillars. So starting first with educate and looking at, how can we be building this education throughout the firm. So, we've been providing lots of educational opportunities for staff in a few different ways. Kind of you need to tell someone the same message several times in several different ways in order for something to stick. So we're constantly kind of putting this information out there for folks to access. So that's through things like, bi-weekly and monthly newsletters that we put out. We're offering monthly low embodied carbon or sustainability focused lunch and learns. We had Mantle Developments come into our firm a couple years ago and do an Embodied Carbon 101 and 201 webinar for us, which we are using for staff to continue to get educated on embodied carbon as we get new staff on board. We also have developed some different design resources for folks. So developing low carbon design cheat sheets and project sustainability design guidelines. So we've developed one for structural engineers, something that our engineers can actually be using on a project to see kind of, okay, where am I at in the design? What kind of tools should I be using? What kind of design strategies should I be thinking about? What kind of materials should I be thinking about? Just to help assist with their design. So we focused first on structure, but we're going to be doing that for our other services as well. We also have a big library of resources that's available to all staff, and we've also linked the resources from SE2050 to all of our staff as well, because as Megan showed, there's some really amazing resources available on the website. And then kind of similar to DIALOG, we're also going to be looking for regional embodied carbon champions. We currently have regional representatives in each office kind of focused on sustainability in general, but wanting to add embodied carbon as like a specific focus either for those folks or looking for some new folks. The second pillar of reporting. So we originally set a target to try to measure embodied carbon and operational carbon on all of our new build projects. I put the star there because that's what we set out to do. But this proves a lot more difficult than what was originally thought. And I think, as Elaine alluded to as well, it's very time intensive to do this and resource intensive. So this year we're taking a bit of a different look at how we want to be measuring the embodied carbon of our projects. So when they get to 100% CD, we're kind of looking at the spread of projects and making sure that we're doing measurements for a nice range of sectors. Rather than just, really focusing on, say, we've got a whole bunch of residential projects. We want to be looking at resi, commercial, institutional, kind of all across the spectrum to get a good understanding of embodied carbon intensity across these different types of projects. And then we populate a database based on this carbon performance, which we're in the process of developing a more formal way to present it, which will then be available to all of our staff. We've also been contributing some project data to different embodied carbon focused studies. And then of course, with SE2050, we'll be contributing data to the database. And then we also have some training videos for staff on how to actually perform an LCA, very similar to what Elaine mentioned as well. You can't just have a couple people that know how to do this. You really do need to spread the knowledge across the firm if you're going to be able to impact every single project. So we really do want to build those skills and capabilities across the firm. Looking at the pillar for reduction strategies. So just some of the actions that we have taken and are taking, looking at low carbon specifications. So we've been updating our specification language to include options and provisions for specifying specific low carbon materials. We've also developed some in-house tools and also leverage other tools that exist out there to be measuring embodied carbon very early in design and then often throughout the design, really trying to remove the barriers to getting this information. We are also setting a target to have 100% of all new staff, all technical staff onboarded with the Embodied Carbon 101 and 201 webinars. And also with the other webinars that, SE2050 also provides these links to kind of just bring up base knowledge on embodied carbon. But we're also beyond just technical staff, we're also getting, our marketing teams to be getting on board with this information, our proposals teams. We just want everybody to really have a solid knowledge of embodied carbon and how we can be reducing it. We also are setting a target to implement our project sustainability guide on a minimum of 10 projects this year. And we're setting annual reduction targets on the path to get to net zero by 2050. So that's something that we're going to be developing further this year. And then looking at the fourth pillar for advocate. So we will be declaring our commitment to SE2050. So we are just signatories in the last couple months, I think, just a month or so ago. So we'll be declaring that commitment on our website. We're going to be adding it to proposal and marketing collateral. We're going to be including it in all of our embodied carbon focused lunch and learn programming, both internally that we provide to our staff and also externally that we provide to our industry partners and clients. We have a few people that are participating in different carbon leadership forum activities. And like I mentioned, we're involved in a few different industry studies on how to get a structure actually down to net zero carbon, and also contributing information to different ongoing studies that are happening both in this region and across the country. And then we have set a target to deliver at least 2 presentations to clients and partners on low embodied carbon reduction strategies. So some of our successes to date, for sure, building the staff LCA capabilities. So like I mentioned, we've got some training videos available for folks if they want to learn how to do these LCAs on their projects. And we're also getting a lot of interest. A lot of staff in the firm are reaching out and asking, what can I be doing to reduce embodied carbon on my project? So we're really happy to be seeing that so many people are really thinking about this and also hearing about it from their clients on their projects. We've been incorporating low embodied carbon strategies into some early concept reports, working again with the design team early on, trying to spread this knowledge across many teams of, these are some low carbon material options that might exist in this specific region, and what cost implications there might be for that. And here are some design strategies that could be considered on the project. So really working collaboratively with the design team on that. And then of course, including this language in our specifications as well. As I mentioned, we've been collaborating on some industry studies and sitting on some advisory committees. So it's been really great to just see the huge community of people that are working towards setting benchmarks, setting targets, and really just trying to advance the whole industry towards low embodied carbon. So that's been a great success to see. And then really importantly, we're also seeing a growing interest from our clients. A lot of our clients are asking for these solutions on their projects. Sometimes it's just a bit of an exploratory exercise. They just want to at least understand what's possible. And then in other instances, some things are actually moving ahead, which is really great to see. And then finally, looking at some lessons learned. So kind of in general, there is no silver bullet solution. It's not a kind of one size fits all when it comes to reducing embodied carbon. It's going to depend on the project. It's going to depend on what's available in the region, or what makes the most sense for that particular project. But we have found that early team collaboration really is key. Having the entire design team at the table early on talking about embodied carbon, put it on the first agenda, like the first meeting, that should be on the agenda. What are we doing about embodied carbon on this project? Because it impacts more than just the structural designer. It's going to impact the architect. Some of the design solutions might impact the contractor as well. So we need to be talking about this very early. It's also going to be a balance between low carbon design and materials. It's not going to be just a, go just to reduce your material quantities or just look at low carbon materials. It really is a balance between the two. And also we know that designers and owners need to be demonstrating a demand for these solutions in the industry. So we really do need to be asking for this information. I think like Megan had on one of her slides, ask for EPDs. It's really going to help to push the manufacturers of these construction products to be at least disclosing the embodied carbon impacts or the environmental impacts of their products, but also working towards lower environmental impact products. And some other challenges and lessons learned for us in terms of specification language, we found, it's again, not one size fits all. What we have in our specs, it might not work in a certain region depending on material availability. So, if you're asking for a certain SCM or even, you know, GUL cement instead of GU, like that might not work in a certain region, or it might end up sole sourcing, and so the owner might not want to have a sole sourced concrete supplier, just for example. So there's a little bit of nuance to putting these specs together. Also market readiness, so kind of in that same vein of depending on where you're at, where the project's at, there might not be tons of availability for different low carbon materials or construction techniques or whatever it might be. So there is a little bit of that hurdle too of the market kind of being ready for these low carbon options. But it is improving, that's for sure. Time and resource availability, also a challenge. You know, it does take a good amount of time and effort for folks to get educated, to upskill, to really know how to implement these low embodied carbon pieces into their designs. It's definitely not, you know, like a prohibitive amount of time, but it does take some time to focus on this. And so I think that we all just need to make sure we're making the time and put a dedicated effort to incorporating this into our designs. It doesn't have to be that difficult to even, you know, achieve some low-hanging fruit embodied carbon reductions. There's lots of options out there. And then change management, you know, when we're talking about incorporating low embodied carbon strategies into our design process, there is some change that has to take place there. And also in terms of just how we look at a project and what we're talking about from the outset and how we're measuring our progress throughout the project, embodied carbon needs to be there the whole way. So there's some change management that comes into play there as well. I think that's it for me. So I'll pass it over to Ben.
Emily, appreciate that. Great, thank you, Michael. So my name is Ben. I'm a structural EIT at NORR. I'm filling in for Ali today, our lead structural engineer, who couldn't make it, unfortunately. But again, I'll be sharing our experience with the SE2050 commitments. Okay, so why join SE2050? So NORR is an integrated structural engineering and architectural firm. You know, there isn't one particular part of this puzzle to solve, you know, embodied carbon. So part of the commitment was to recognize the impact that us as structural engineers have on the structure, and then, you know, develop that in tandem with our architects and our mechanical and electrical teams to really, you know, make the full use of our collaborative environments and see how well we can take this. This figure was showing the same chart that Megan was showing earlier about the combined efforts of AIA 2030 and SE 2050. So this is our motivation at NORR. So why join SE 2050? To further this collaborative vision between our architects and engineers. Another big point for me personally is it's nice to be a part of the greater professional community. Of course, you know, everyone attending here, we're all rooting for the same cause, and it's nice to be a part of a community for, you know, taking on what is a pretty daunting task. And again, another personal note: if none of these other points resonate with you, as humans, we should have a duty to our environment. So there's a nice personal contribution as well to joining this commitment as a structural engineer and a structural designer. So our plan, we use the guidance provided by SE 2050 pretty closely. So they recommend sort of 4 pillars of change to help your firm adjust to meeting the requirements. So education, reporting, reduction, and advocacy are the 4 pillars. So for education, it's pretty straightforward, you know, just spreading the message internally and within our client networks as well, that, you know, first of all, we've signed on to this commitment. We intend to follow through with it in our design meetings. And this also extends into educating our entire structural team on, you know, the role we play in tackling embodied carbon, design tricks to help reduce embodied carbon in design. And ultimately, our goal is to get everybody performing LCAs on their own projects, so that sort of as the other presenters were mentioning, we don't necessarily have one person running around doing LCAs for everything. We really see it as a duty of the engineer on the project to also be aware of the embodied carbon they are ultimately specifying. The second pillar is reporting. So it is important to keep track of the embodied carbon totals, so we contribute to the SE2050 database, and it is important to see where we're going on the route to 2050 to make sure we actually are seeing a change in embodied carbon totals in our designs. And it helps to share more broadly with the community as well, to establish benchmarks and baselines for structures. So reduction strategies are probably the most, the largest pillar of these four, because this is what you actually have to implement in your design. So we've taken some time to sort of develop our workflows from an early stage to include reduction strategies where we can, and also to set reduction goals on each project. And thankfully, we're in a good position where, since we're an integrated A&D firm, we can work very closely with our architects from very early on to help inform grid spacing and bay sizing and things at a very early stage that do have an impact on embodied carbon. And finally, advocacy is the last pillar. So similar to education, we make efforts to outreach to clients, other structural engineers that we know who haven't joined this commitment yet. We like to take the time to reach out, share what the program is about, why it's important. It is an important step. If we can get everyone on board, obviously the challenge becomes a lot easier to tackle. So just some successes. I'll try and wrap this up quickly. So for the first success is more of a shift in the design mindset. So great architecture and engineering should be carbon responsible, and we see that change happening in our discussions between our engineering and architectural teams. People are generally open to discussing the effects of carbon and how we can reduce it. Everyone acknowledges it as an important step in the design process, which is a good success. The second point is that engineering input is critical in the early stages. So again, we're trying to just keep the mindset that this is a step in the design process. This isn't necessarily a number you crunch at the end of a design. You really need to be aware of this throughout the entire design process. So that's something we've been successful in doing. Another mindset that I like to personally keep in mind is, if you hold carbon considerations in the same level as you would safety considerations in a design, it really helps remind you that we need immediate action. And if you hold the two in the same light, it really motivates you to really optimize for carbon as you would optimize for safety. Some other successes, as I mentioned, we have a collaborative engineering and architectural practice. So we have had a lot of success in setting up, interdisciplinary teams to really communicate back and forth to how we could reduce carbon while still meet client requirements or project requirements. And finally, advocacy. We every education opportunity we can, we send it to our network, our clients, co-workers or colleagues at other firms. We generally try to share as much information as possible in the name of advocacy. So we joined SE2050 almost exactly a year ago. So just 5 takeaways to wrap this up. Number one, this might come off as a buzzword, but it is really important. Adaptive reuse must be the first consideration whenever applicable. So the least carbon intensive building is the one that's already built. So if we can make use of what we have, that's always the best option. 2, carbon calculations are a critical part of the design process. So if I could tell you anything, it's that treat it as if you are designing for low carbon. Again, not just a number you're crunching at the end of a project. 3, challenging design parameters is an effective way of reducing carbon. A lot of clients will have preferred live loading values, for example, which, you know, are conservative and may have their own use. But, you know, if you really start to scrutinize these sort of set design parameters, it's an effective way to, you know, ultimately maybe reduce loads on a structure, or really change what the structured performance is intended to be a more reasonable and carbon friendly level. 4, tracking embodied carbon is as important as specifying reduction strategies. Like I said earlier, it is important to know where we're going in terms of our ability to reduce carbon. And it's also important to share that with the broader community to, you know, really make sure we're on track and see what works, see what doesn't work. And 5, this is more specific, but mass timber is not the only solution. It is an effective means, but, you know, a lot of efficient design is needed everywhere in the building. You know, you can't just specify a mass timber frame, but have massive concrete foundations that aren't optimized at all. So, you know, it's really a process you need to look at from, you know, substructure to superstructure and everything in between as well. So that about wraps it up. I'll pass it back to Megan now for the Q&A.
Thanks, Benjamin. Yeah, so we've gotten a couple good questions in, so let me try and address as many as we can in the 10 minutes left. Maybe first up is, with all the different LCA tools, references, and data out there, how do you decide on a consistent methodology for calculating embodied carbon in your projects? What's missing for this to be done consistently across the sector? So maybe I'll address that first and then pass that off to my fellow presenters. It's obviously a really great question and something that has been discussed at length kind of at the committee. And I think, you know, even within the committee, there's no kind of general consensus on how we should be doing that. And obviously that's a bit of a something that's going to hold us back. So there will be an LCA methodology guide coming out by SE2050, hopefully sometime this year, that is supposed to give a little bit more guidance on how to maybe standardize the process of how we're collecting our SMQs and reporting them. And so I think that should hopefully help a bit, but anyway, it has been talked about as being something that needs to kind of get addressed in the industry, that we need to have a better, more consistent way that we're doing it. But what I will say is, if you can be consistent within your own firm, within your projects, that's going to go a long way, so that at least you will know from the data that you're collecting on your projects how well you're tracking from your projects to projects. And so I think that's going to be key at first. So making sure that you're consistent, like if you have multiple modelers, are you guys modeling things all in the same way, so that you know when you're pulling, if you're pulling your material quantities out of your Revit model, like what's included and what's not. And so I think that would be maybe my big thing, but look out for some references coming. And yeah, there should be some resources coming in this space that should hopefully make it a bit more standardized across the profession. But I don't know, Elaine, Emily, Benjamin, any further comments?
Yeah, I could just add to that. I believe NRCan in Canada, NRCan is also releasing an LCA guide methodology. I can't remember when that one's coming out, but I think it's going to be soon. So that'll be some more guidance as well. But definitely it is a good point. There are differences across the different LCA tools. We did a study with an architect where they did the LCA in Tally. We did it in one-click LCA for the exact same building. It was a lot of work going through the Revit model because it wasn't modeled with an LCA in mind. So there was a lot of work that had to be done to make sure that we could confidently extract material quantities from the model. And I think the differences in our final embodied carbon values, I think it was like a 40% difference. So it can be significant across different LCA tools. So we definitely do need consistency. But yeah, I think the industry is moving in the right direction in that sense.
Yeah, that opens up a whole other can of worms of just, we've done a study within the California SEA of just looking at the same bill of material quantities going into different LCA tools. And anyway, there is definitely some differences there. So you wouldn't want to mix and match. You'd want to select the tool that you're using for your office and be comparing against that. And so obviously that brings up some questions at the database level. And so that's kind of why we're asking for that different information and why we potentially may ask for structural material quantities in the future. All right, so let's try and get to, okay, the question around building efficiency versus building more adaptability, which is a great one. Are there any times that you'd suggest using a more robust design to mitigate the impact of occupancy changes in the future? Does someone want to take that one?
So we haven't had too many instances where we have done that. I don't know. It's my personal opinion that reducing carbon right now in the sake of maybe a less robust design is better than designing something over conservative now. So that it could be used for a different use in 20, 30 years. Technology in 20, 30 years in terms of retrofitting will probably be better, especially, with carbon in mind. So, I mean, it's just my opinion, but I think sort of deferring that retrofit to later in the name of saving, time, money, carbon now is an okay trade-off in my mind.
I just put a link to the chat to an architect out in the Bay Area, Larry Strain. He's done a lot of work in the kind of time value of carbon and really pushes for utilizing existing structures. I think he also has this tool coming out. I think it's almost in beta. There should be a link on the CLF on evaluating embodied carbon for existing structures. So really excited to kind of see what that looks like. But I do think it is an interesting topic. And also I think like digital twins has come up in a similar vein of just talking about how can we better, utilize our, if we're designing new, how can we better make them so that they last longer and can be adaptable for future uses. And I definitely think that should be taken into consideration. Again, where I practice, we're in the high seismic region. And so taking into account like higher seismic performance is also another topic that's not yet or has been tried to be addressed in certain ways, but it's still like a newer topic that we're trying to tackle. All right, maybe we'll try and get one more question in. This question's about LCAs on projects and if there has been any strategy, or what are your best strategies to get them to be completed within your office and on projects, and how do you deal with if you're getting resistance within your own team? How does project budget come into play? Maybe the one thing I'll say just to start us off, I definitely think we should try and get paid to doing these LCAs on our projects. And so we've been working on some draft language to put into our proposal language. That'll be in every proposal to add it as an add alternate and see if we get some bites on that. But yeah, I think you should be really clear with what you're defining and how you do it. I think a lot of this has been said before, but getting your LCA really should be done throughout the design process. The whole spirit of LCA is to, once your main system is chosen, to then use it as you're making design decisions to kind of use embodied carbon as a metric that you're tracking in your design decisions. So it might not win out all the time, but at least you're understanding the trade-offs of doing something versus something else. And so it should be being done continuously, or maybe you're doing it at the end of your major design phases. But yeah, I'd be curious from Emily, Benjamin, or Elaine if you have any strategies to share with any employees that may be difficult to do your LCA.
I think what really does affect the buy-in, either from our partners or associates or even our teams, is we have to define a budget, so people can have an idea of how long this is going to take. We know it's not going to take 120 hours, and maybe it's not going to take 40 hours. And the reason I'm scaling down is because at Dialogue, our ballpark is about 8 to 12 hours. And when you say that to people, they can envision that. They can put that in their timeline for projects. And as I was saying before, we want to automate this as much as possible, because the idea is we're not going to be splitting hairs counting rebar. We want to leverage our tools, our 3D Revit models, so that we can do them easily, and we can, but also trust that it is accurate. And so again, all that to say is, we need to have it. We need to have a timeline. We need to have a budget, and if we exceed that at the beginning, that's to be expected, right? But we need to have an idea of where we want to be in terms of timelines, and I think that is a big factor for us.
All right, I think we only got 1 minute left. Michael, is there some last final parting words, or are we good to go?
Yeah, thanks, Megan. I just wanted to say thank you to all of our speakers today. That was a great session. There are a number of CLF Toronto events coming up in the next weeks and months, so please visit our website, clftoronto.com, to learn more. Otherwise, have a great day, everyone, and thank you for joining.
Thanks, everyone.